Venerable, we might just do a little welcome to acknowledgement of country, and we'll all offer a mandala and all of the various offerings that people may have in their lounge rooms around the world. So we've got people here from across Australia, from one side of Australia to the other side of Australia, people from Tasmania, and then from Hawaii and
Bali,
Honolulu in Hawaii.
And Refuge in Bali.
And Bali, okie dokie. So New Zealand, Christchurch.
There you go.
We're having a bit of a severe weather event a little bit more south than Brisbane, where it's been raining so much everybody's been told to stay home.
Oh my God, really? Threats of floods, you mean? There could be floods.
Yeah.
My God.
Yep, floods. Huge, like 2 meters of rain, 20 centimeters of rain in an hour or something like that. God. Ridiculous.
I know.
So,
be careful.
We're going to start with our acknowledgement of country, because we are on borrowed land, and so in Australia it's so important that we acknowledge and pay respects to the whole tradition and history of this land that we're on, because there's such power of place. Langri Tangpa Centre is a holy place, but it's also thanks to trying to be harmonious with our environment. So we kind of acknowledge our environmental history, and that we're on the land of the Jagera and Turrbal people, and who are the traditional custodians of this land. And so we pay our respects with enormous gratitude to all the elders, past, present and emerging, and warmly welcome all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders to our teachings here, and try in every way to be harmonious with all the residents, seen and unseen, of this land.
Wonderful.
And then, Venerable Robina, we have a mandala offering for you. And so this time I thought I'd try and sing it in English for you.
Good. Well done. Wonderful.
So we'll see how it goes, because it's one of the things I try and do to somehow fit the English into the Tibetan tunes.
Wonderful. Well done.
So everybody, we're going to be offering this mandala that looks like a crown. Here we go. This ground anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru for continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Rana Mandala Kamniyatayami.
Wonderful. So Buddha, we think Buddha's received our marvelous offering so happily. So we think Buddha's going to give the teachings. I'm just this kind of face. The teachings are coming from the Buddha. Think like that. Then there's great blessings. Okay, good.
And we have, I've put together the Refuge and bodhichitta slide, Venerable, if you...
Yes, absolutely, we'll do that as well.
Wanted to use that, I'll say a little...
Absolutely. So this one, it's sort of stating two things. First is for those of us who kind of figure we rely upon the Buddha already, and I'll say it in my own words, what we're saying in these first two lines, until we are enlightened, we will rely upon the Buddha, his teachings, and our spiritual community who support us. And the second two lines are expressing our motivation, as the Lamas would say, or our purpose, our goal, why are we here together. So we're thinking that this is the other one. This is not the teachings one. So we're going to change the word slightly. The word should say by all the virtuous karma we create by listening to these teachings. Well, I'll say it in English, it's okay. By all the virtuous karma we create by listening to these teachings, may we become a Buddha to benefit every single suffering sentient being. So then I'll do two more times. That's the first time. I'll do two more times in Tibetan. I'll just change the word where it says Chönyen. That's correct. The Tibetan's correct, but the English was not correct. Okay. Sangye chadang soke chognam la, jangchu badu dagni kyab suchi, dagi chunyen gi personam ki, drola penchir sangye drupa shog. Sangye chadang soke chognam la, jangchu badu dagni kyab suchi, dagi chunyen gi personam ki, drola penchir sangye drupa shog. Okie doke, that's it. Thank you, folks. Okay, sweethearts, we're talking about the mind, aren't we? If we work on our mind, anything's possible. Work on our mind, we can, and this is really, for the Buddhist view, it's literally the truth. It's not some kind of tricky marketing ploy. It's not some kind of magic. It's actually hard work. But I think we don't mind hard work when we understand we've got to, if you've got a map, and you've got a journey of 10,000 kilometers and you've got obstacles at every block, you still got a map and you will persevere and you're confident because you've got a map. I think this is a really important point. And I think major part of our problem in our culture, and it's not meant to be rude to neuroscientists or psychiatrists or therapists, they're wonderful, kind people, but there's no, we don't have any certainty. We're still looking very strongly, it's the scientific method, looking very strongly to find the causes of all these things. And we're looking, and that's fantastic. But I mean, all we're doing here is presenting what Buddha has found. It happens to be 2,500 years old. And believe me, he didn't make it up. He got it from these dudes before him. India was crawling in these amazing holy beings who'd invented this single point of concentration, who invented this incredible technique that enables you to know and unpack and unravel your mind to degrees of such brilliance that we are shocked by it in our culture. And this is still existing. And this is being practiced by people like you and me in the metaphorical mountains or the actual mountains every single day. So the point about when you start to study the Buddhist model, if we so choose, no one can force us. And I really mean study it properly, not just sort of half pie, vaguely think what you think Buddha means, but really seriously jump into it. Then you start to get, in the beginning it's difficult because you don't have confidence. This is the irony of ego. We don't have confidence. We don't have confidence in our own being, in our own mind. We just don't have that confidence. We buy into these depression, we buy into the anxiety, we buy into the anger, we buy into the fears. And because this is what's most shocking and most fascinating, we spend the next 2 hours just on this. That when the thoughts arise in our mind, when the feelings arise, one of the tragic things is we utterly believe it's the truth and we believe this is me. I'm sure we talked about it last week. And this for Buddha is because these are very ancient habits. But the point about the Buddhist view, and this is why Lama Yeshe was so unbelievable. I mean, those of us who know Lama Yeshe, he was the one who first began meeting Westerns. He's probably one of the first Tibetan Lamas. In the mid-60s, he met his first Western student. And if you've listened to Tibetan teachings, I mean, you can't stress this enough. If you listen to classic Tibetan teachings from a classical Tibetan Lama, it literally is still medieval because this is the goodness of it. Tibet was on the other side of the Himalayas and Tibet wasn't very friendly to foreigners. They chucked them all out. It was just as well because Buddhism kept rich and delicious in Tibet, untouched and unpolluted for, I don't know, from 700. So it was an extraordinarily sophisticated system. But literally the way, for example, when I first heard Lama Zopa teach up at Chenrezig, he would have spoken exactly like they would have spoken in the Middle Ages, 14th century, because even the language in Tibet, this is what's fascinating, the language in Tibet, they've got daily language, they've got honorifics for your grandma and all the high people, and then they have philosophical and religious language, and that has been unchanged since they first invented it in the 7th century. These genius translators came from India, or they went to India and learned Sanskrit, and they invented the language for their Buddhism. So it stayed truly intact. So when you heard Lama Zopa teach in 1976 in Chenrezig Institute, I might as well have been in the 14th century. So no wonder I didn't understand. No wonder it's hard for us initially, you got to kind of get your way through and try to bring it on. And this is where Lama Yeshe was unbelievable, I swear to you. I'm so fortunate that I have to edit his books, so I'm intimately familiar with the way he talked. And the effort that Lama went to find words and structure to communicate with us. He was like he was born a hippie. He just knew how to talk. He knew, it was astonishing when you look at the Tibetan tradition. He was utterly remarkable. And what I got from Lama Yeshe, anybody who knows him says the same, he could see immediately, because these lamas, they know their minds intimately, and this is the Buddha's skill. This is something we don't have in the West. We know, if we know the mind in the West, we know the brain beautifully. But a person who knows neuroscience will look at you and not have a clue what's going on because they can't see your brain. The Buddhist view is so much more direct, which is coming from these Indians. The the mind for the Buddha is your thoughts and feelings and emotions. And because when you've understood your own mind intimately using this model of the mind that covers all beings in the universe, the model of the mind for Buddha isn't just for humans. It's all beings. It covers animals. It covers all the beings we can't see. It's an incredibly coherent model of the mind. And the Indians were the first one to see it. So it's the key to the success of knowing the mind in the Buddhist tradition is it demands the same clarity and precision that we know we need for, say, for neuroscience or for math or gardens or something. But we don't have that in our culture, in psychology. We're a bit sort of wishy-washy about psychology. But the wisdom of the Buddhism of knowing exactly, and you've got this map. There is this map, and it's 2,500 years old. Not just the map of the mind, but the map of the methods of how to get rid of the rubbish, So when you've got a map, and it's clearly stated, and there was Lama Yeshe giving words that encouraged us. Every time I heard Lama Yeshe, I'd sighed with relief. Thank God it's possible, I think, So there's this map of the mind, and because when you've learned that for yourself, when you're really skillful yourself about your own mind, you can see the minds of others. They're nakedly obvious to you. That's why they can help, So this Buddhist view of the mind is so precise. It's not speculation. It's not sort of changing every minute. It's been the same for 2,500 years. And you either think they're stubborn or it actually works, and that's for us to look into. But what I think is interesting, most of us who like Buddhism or study Buddhism or practice Buddhism, we don't really study the mind. We hear words like anger, attachment, compassion, love. We all know those words. We're familiar. They're not like OCD and ADID and ADHD and all the words we've made up in modern psychology, and I'm not complaining. They're simple words, so we almost dismiss them because they're so simple. We think there's something more complicated, But the Buddha's view is that when you've studied the model of the mind, and I want to talk about, obviously more about that here, when we understand exactly what he means by attachment, what's the definition? What is anger? What is love? What is generosity? What is kindness? What is concentration? The precision of the Buddhist view is really fascinating. There are clear, exact definitions, There's no speculation about it. And so the key thing that's utterly unique to the Buddhist view of the mind, and this really does take us time to see this, the key thing is this. The Buddhist model of the mind, covering our mental consciousness, which covers all our thoughts, feelings, emotions, unconscious, this whole spectrum of our inner being. For us, it's utter chaos, isn't it? You wake up in the morning until you go to sleep, the mind is just chat, 1,000 thoughts a second. And that's from the Western psychological point of view, 1,000 thoughts a second. Buddha totally agrees, So the thing is, this map of the mind in Buddhism is so clear. It divides all the contents of our head, the thousands of complicated, seemingly complicated, chaotic, uncontrolled, unedited thoughts at different levels of subtlety and grossness and intensity. It's just like, it's naturally for us, it's chaos. And so in the materialist model, our Western view, it's natural to have a chaotic mind. Everybody's got it. We don't have techniques. That's why we're starting to like mindfulness. We see these amazing Indians from more than 3,000 years ago invented this brilliant technique that if you really practice seriously, you can actually, and this is not joking, harness the entirety of your head into clear, coherent, edited, reasonable, understandable thoughts. This sounds like hilarious to us, but this is exactly what we're capable of. Now, of course, 99% of us won't go and give up sex, drugs and rock and roll and go to the mountains because they're the conditions you need to do it seriously. But all these tools are there available to us. So once you need two things. This skill to be able to focus. Why? Because that gives you the ability to see what the hell is going on. If you're all over the place like a duck's breakfast or a dog's breakfast, my grandmother used to say that. I never know if it's a duck or a dog. All over the place like a dog's breakfast would probably be a dog, wouldn't it? Did your grandmother say that too? Yes? That's completely Australian.
My grandmother would have said it in Latvian, but I think it's a dog's breakfast, not a... So today with the weather, it's probably a duck's breakfast.
A duck's breakfast, okay. So the thing is, we know that in this mind of ours, there we are, get up in the morning and the feeling might come, the anxiety, you hop out of bed, you do the dishes, you do the jobs because you've got your jobs to do, and you're focusing on the outside, but we hear this chat, never stopping, isn't it? Never stopping. So we don't pay attention until it starts to get loud. And this is the real point, until it starts to shake the body. The eyes, your eyes are wide, the mouth vomiting, the words are vomiting out your mouth, or you can't get out of bed. This is when, we talked about this last week, the wheels falling off. We talked about it as a lot. So the Buddhist model of the mind, when we can learn this, first theoretically, Initially it sounds so boring and intellectual. You think, what's it got to do with life, you know? But like anything, like if you learn a cake recipe, it's boring. But once you get to know how to make the cake and get the cake, you get excited. But it's the same here. It's a very precise model. So the key factor to understand is this. The Buddha divides the entire contents of our head into 3 categories, precisely. There's no equivalent in modern psychology. And there are those that are neurotic, delusional, distressing, painful. I mean, excuse me, we know them so intimately. Attachment, anger, depression, anxiety, and all the variations. Then you've got the positive ones. They're our saving grace. But the tragedy is they seem to be in the background. Like I talk about with my roommates. They seem to be hiding under the bed and they're in the wardrobe. They won't come out. The other ones, the anxiety and the fears and the worries, we know this and it's utterly fascinating. We should look at why this is. It's very interesting. They seem to loom large, don't they? They seem to run the show. Even though you're there being kind to your next door neighbour, your anxious thoughts are there. Even though you're being lovely to your grandchild and giving them their breakfast, you know, you're angry about your husband. There's all these unhappy thoughts and they seem to loom large. So Buddha divides into the neurotic, unhappy, deluded ones, the virtuous, positive, optimistic ones, and these are our saving grace. Now, before we even go further to the third category, the Buddha's incredible experiential finding, and this does not exist in modern psychology, it does not exist in neuroscience, is that the negative, unhappy, deluded ones, we're going to describe them, we described last week, we'll describe again. The Buddha's long-term finding from his own experience is that these are not at the core of our being. These are like additives. It's like pollution in the water. It's an interesting analogy. You know, mind, and this is where it's so inspiring to read, say, like Lama Yeshe in his book Mahamudra, which he actually taught at Chenrezig. No, he taught that at a Teacher Centre in Bendigo, 1982. When Lama talks a lot, and there's a lot of this in the Buddhist literature, it's very inspiring. When you read the biographies, when you read the literature about the mind and what its marvellous potential is. We don't talk like that in our culture. But the mind for the Buddha is, in its nature, it is clear, radiant, pure, virtuous. The virtues, the goodness, the kindness, the love, the compassion, the intelligence, this is Buddha's point. They are at the core of our being. They define our reality. So we don't believe this initially. It's like a joke. I mean, as I said, they're all hiding under the mattress in the wardrobe. They don't come out. Like I said last week, I've never met a person yet who says, Robina, I can't stop thinking good thoughts. Nobody ever says that. So our mind is chaotic. It's unedited, confusing. We can't work out one thought from another. It's like a great big soup of vegetables all flying about in a big soup. But not only are they bits of soup flying about, they're pureed soup. They're so integrated and mixed together, we can't tell one bit from another. And that's 90% of our problem. So let's look more at this one today. How do we distinguish between, let's say, for example, love and attachment? Let's just say, simple example. Because in the first category, you have the unhappy... What?
Can I just jump in for a moment? I'm having a difficulty with our bandwidth, so I'm just going to try a different bandwidth, and so I don't want to lose you on what you're going to say. So let me... and...
Yeah, clear.
Okay, I think we're back. I can hear you again now.
Good. Everybody can hear? We're all okay? All good? Good.
Well, it just says my bandwidth is low and you're kind of moving a bit in slow motion, but I can hear.
Dear.
So if anyone has any difficulties, then please just put it into the chat for me.
Everybody else can hear okay, yeah? All is good for most people? Okay, good.
As far as I know,
okay,
yep.
Good. Okay, let's hope. Because keep your eye on it, Miffy. Okay, good, darling. So the key characteristic in the Buddhist one, which is not like the way we think, is we've got these unhappy, neurotic, deluded thoughts that are emotions, but that are rooted in being thoughts. This is the one that's the hardest. I think we talked about this last week. It's hard to see this, but let's continue to talk about it. Then we have the positive, virtuous, appropriate, useful ones. The key function of the first lot is that they cause us pain. The key function of the second lot, love and compassion and kindness, they cause us to be happy. Forget about what they do to others. First of all, for ourselves. That's why the first lot are often referred to as disturbing emotions. So now, and you're probably thinking, well, yeah, we know that. We know depression is a disturbing emotion. We know anger is a disturbing emotion. We know anxiety is a disturbing emotion. Then what? But this is the point. This is the radical difference in our culture. And we know the virtuous ones are good, but part of our problem is we set them in stone. We assume I've got this much anger, this much love, this much kindness, and that's just the way it is. We don't have a feeling that we can grow our mind. I mean, Lama Zopa says we can mold our mind into any shape we like. And that actually, this is, actually the essential, fundamental, key, actual job of being a Buddhist is to work on your mind. And what that means is to lessen, as the more you become familiar, you are lessening the anger, the attachment, the jealousy, the pride. This is so hard to believe how that's possible, but I'll give you the key to why. And then we are growing the love, the compassion, the kindness, the generosity, the forgiveness. It's not set in stone. I've got this much and that's it. We cross your fingers and hope for the best. I mean, these days, in modern science, they now, they're now discovered that you're not stuck with the brain you're born with. We're proving this point that Buddha's been very politely telling us for 2,500 years, that you can change your mind. We've only recently discovered that we really did believe that the brain was what you're stuck with, and that's why we believe we're stuck with it. We feel it. What can I do? I've only got that much love, I've only got that much anger. What can I do? No. We're not stuck with the brain we're born with. One Canadian scientist said it was the greatest finding of the 20th century. Well, I'm happy we're catching up with Buddha. Been politely telling us for 2,500 years, my dears, So anyway, the point is, Buddha's seeing, he has found from his own experience, this is the meaning of the word nirvana. It's not some kind of place like heaven. Don't put it in the sky somewhere. You've achieved your nirvana, your liberation from suffering and its causes, when you've done this radical job of reconfiguring the contents of your mental consciousness. You've finally rid the mind, please hear my words, rid the mind of attachment, anger, fears, and the root one, this neurotic sense of a separate, miserable, lonely, bereft me. And then we've developed to an amazing degree the other positive qualities. So the point is, what I'm getting at is this: we're nowhere near like that now. But we've got a map, people. And I don't care if that map is 10,000 kilometers away and you've got, like I said, there's an obstacle every block. If you've got a map, you've got some confidence. So that's why it's encouraging when I read Lama Yeshe. He encourages me when even if you see somebody out there who's done the job, look at the Dalai Lama. We love to put him up, oh, that's just the Dalai Lama, or put him on a pedestal, That's insulting him. Since he's 15, he hasn't stopped being compassionate and kind and loving in this world and trying to make the world a better place. And he's a happy, funny, relaxed guy, no matter how much suffering. So he has to be the proof of the pudding. It's like if you've never seen a tennis player ever play tennis in your life and you've only read books, and one day you see Federer, you'd be in bliss. Oh my God, look, it's possible. I can do it. And you follow Federer's rules, and it doesn't take you 27 years, it doesn't matter. Our problem is we don't have any map, we don't believe it's possible, we have no real methods except to take a pill, or cut your bit of brain out, or do something, or kill your husband. We don't have methods for working on our mind, and I mean our actual subjective cognitive process itself. And you know what? That even changes your brain. They've proven that now. They did all these experiments on different meditators, and there's one marvelous French one, Mathieu Ricard, who's a meditator, a wonderful holy being. And they stuck things on his brain, and he didn't do anything fancy like meditate on emptiness. He just thought about compassion. They saw he reconfigured his brain. This should give us confidence, people. Even your thoughts can reconfigure your brain. I mean, what did they do in the 1930s? They cut out the bits of the brain. They did lobotomy, making veggies out of people. We learned the hard lesson. So when you know it's possible that you can change your thoughts, then you're happy to greet all these crazy roommates. But this is the tragedy. We can't stand these roommates. We freak out about these roommates. As we talked last week, it's bad enough you've got anger in there and jealousy in there. And then you discover your anger. And then you get you add another angry roommate that gets angry about the anger. And you keep adding crazy roommates. And it never ends. So, of course, because these are habitual, because they seem to come automatically, we don't think, when I was a little girl, I didn't have to sit there and think, will I be angry or won't I be angry? Oh, I think I'll be angry. No, believe me, it wasn't like that. It was out my mouth. So of course I assumed anger was my second name. Of course I did. And everybody else did too. And they reinforced, oh, Robina's angry. So then you buff back because you're wanting people to love you, but they say you're angry. Oh, I must be angry. Then all this rubbish happens. And then we have this vivid view of ourselves set in stone, reinforced by our family, our friends, our people, and we just become paralyzed, you know. And this is the tragedy. We talked about this last week too. We've got to look at this. When you're unhappy, when you're angry with your husband, or when you're depressed about yourself, either way, these are both expressions of anger, and I'll discuss this. Then at that time when it's strong, and I'm saying to her, tell me what's going on, Miffy, and she will give me a detailed description of ugly Eddie. Eddie's great, but just pretend, you know, ugly Eddie. She will tell me
it only happens every few years now,
oh,
Venerable, but, you know, I'll think back to the last time.
Oh, well, very good. Oh, that's amazing. That's wonderful. But let's just pretend Miffy's a regular girl and she's got this rude, mean boy called Eddie. So she's telling me, I'm saying, Miffy, what's wrong, darling? Eddie did this and Eddie did that and he said this and he said that. And I say, oh, really? And he might have, this is the point, he might have done those things. But what we don't see is, and what Miffy hasn't seen, because, you know, she's not a practitioner, we're pretending, she was a regular girl once. When she says this story, it's the absolute concrete fact, isn't it? We know when you're mad at somebody, you know you're mad at them. You say, he did this, he did that, he is this, he's the cause of all my suffering, I want to kill him. And then it's like absolute truth. There's not a millimeter of space to even possibly consider even a tiny amount of slightly seeing it from a different point of view. Forget it. This is the character of all the unhappy states of mind. Now, when it's yourself, and Miffy, let's say, pretending she's telling you about how ugly she is and how hopeless she is, she can't do anything, and it's a disaster, and I don't know what to do, and I'm completely hopeless, I'm totally depressed, and I'm nothing, and I'm worthless. Listen to us. His Holiness heard about self-hate, and he said that's a mental illness. He was so sad, you know. And it's one of our main sufferings in our culture. So let's say when Miffy's telling me the story about herself. Now, we're listening carefully, and we're her friend, and we know, don't we, that she's also got other qualities. We've seen it. That's why we like Miffy. She's kind, she's funny, she's cute. But at that moment, when she's telling us the depressed version of herself, again, it's absolutely rigid, it's set in stone, and there's not a millimeter of space to hear anything. So I might even try to say, well, Miffy, you know, darling, I understand you. I try to be kind. I do understand. But sweetheart, I think there are some other qualities there as well. I've got a feeling you're not as bad as you think. I am, she will say. And then when you talk about Eddie, he is. So when we can see this, and we all know it, and then maybe when she calms down later, and she'll kind of feel embarrassed what she got so stubborn, you know. But one of the key characteristics, and this is dealt with in very precise language in the Buddhist psychological model, the key characteristics of all the unhappy ones is they're rigid, concrete, stuck, unable to move a millimeter. They're set in stone. And the Buddha is simply saying nothing exists like that. And they blind us. That view of depression, which is internalized anger, and I want to describe this. Miffy's got anger in this case, and it's called depression. And who is the object of it? It's called Miffy. And how does Miffy appear to the depressed mind? Ugly, hopeless. And then the tragedy is we utterly and completely believe it. This is the bad. As Lama Zopa says, it's bad enough that we see things in a distorted, exaggerated way. That Miffy's anger is over-exaggerating Eddie's ugliness. That Miffy's depression is over-exaggerating her ugliness. That's bad enough. But he said the worst thing is we believe it is the objective truth. This is why the world is so suffering. This is why we kill each other and ourselves. We can hear this. But when we're in the midst of it, it's like you've gone mad. Nothing will change your mind. We know this. This is the tragedy, you know. So even to begin to hear the Buddhist view that these cognitive stories, these conceptual stories called anger, depression, jealousy, attachment, and they've each got their own specific way to exaggerate, and they all share the key characteristic. This is the point that Buddha's making. The delusions, the neuroses, the disturbing emotions, their key function is to exaggerate, and then they cause pain. So Miffy's anger exaggerates Eddie's ugliness. Her depression exaggerates her ugliness. This is the most tragic thing. And then we believe it. So this is what paralyzes us. And then we don't think we've got any choice. There's no way we can dig ourselves out of this, you know. This is the tragedy. This is the tragedy. So the reason they're so strong, it's very simple. You know yourself. If you know, we call instinct in the West. It's very interesting. You have instinct means you do something without thought. It just happens naturally. Well, this is Buddha's view, and I think it's quite helpful to hear this as at least a background to why these habits are so instinctive with us. Is Buddha says we don't start fresh in our mother's womb, which is how we tend to think. Or if we do look into the past, we're looking back to mummy's past, daddy's past, the grandma's, and the great-grandma's past, back to the monkeys, looking for the cause of why I am like this. That's fine, but Buddha says, no, you look into your own past. Buddha and modern psychology look into the past, but Buddha looks into our past. That's the radical difference. And that means, of course, we have to assert the possibility that our mind, our consciousness, our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions didn't come from mummy and daddy, don't come from a creator, and can't come from nothing. They've got their own continuity. So we can see this with little children. You know, I'm fascinated by these little children who play music, like these little children who can just play Bach from the age of 2.5, you know. And we just go, isn't that amazing? Wow, wow, wow. But equally, what about the 2-year-olds who want to kill ants every day? We can't cope with that one. But this is what the meaning of karma is. So when something is instinctive, you know that. So when you can do something really well, it's become instinctive. So, but then you've got to analyze, what's the cause of that? You've practiced it. It's really obvious. So we take this view that we must have practiced anger and attachment and depression, but also our saving grace. We must have practiced love and compassion and kindness and patience if we've got them. So at least we can see that they're programmed in us, but they're not set in stone. They are not absolute. They're not just a function of your brain. They're habits. And we all know habits can change. Habits die hard, but their habits in their nature are things we can cultivate. So what we're trying to do as the Buddhists is to try and lessen the power of the negative habits and grow the power of the good habits. Now, I find it most fascinating that we understand this exactly when it comes to learning how to cook, play music, knit. We all have techniques. We know we begin as a zero knitter. We know nothing about knitting. And then we know there are methods that you start to practice. But listen to this. Knitting just doesn't happen with your fingers. Knitting comes from the mind. You learn the theories of knitting. But we don't think of it this way. You've got no thoughts in your mind at all about how to knit. You are completely ignorant. So if we believed in that not knowing about knitting, in the same way we believe in not knowing how to be patient, we'd never learn a single thing. We'd still be crawling on all fours. But we know we can change and learn to knit, learn to walk, learn to talk, learn the most amazing things, which means you start by having the thoughts. We know we can do this, but for some bizarre reason, we have a whole set of rules different for the emotional thoughts, because finally, anger, attachment, jealousy, love, compassion are rooted in being conceptual stories. That's when we start to learn to meditate and start to go beneath the emotional component and start to listen to these thousands of thoughts all racing together and start to make sense of them before they get to the mouth. That's the key to success, you know. So anger, attachment, jealousy, love, compassion, kindness, they've each got their own precise definition, and each of them is basically one of your roommates. Think of it like your roommates. So what is anger saying? Anger says, you are horrible, I hate you, you're the cause of all my suffering. What is jealousy saying? How dare you be happy on the strength, whatever. What is attachment saying? Oh, you're so divine, I must hungrily have you. Each of them has got a story, but we only notice, as I said last week, we only notice those stories when they've hit the body and we have a feeling. Well, a feeling is way too gross, A feeling is not nearly enough to look at. You've got to go beneath the feeling, to unpack and pay attention every single second of the day. That's the job we have to learn, to listen to each of these thoughts, hear what anxiety is saying. It's so hard because anxiety is just, as Miffy was saying last week, anxiety is just this gripping feeling. But it's only the gripping feeling because we haven't paid attention earlier. That's why we need a bit of meditation every morning. That's the skill. We bring it to bear in our daily life. And instead of just mindlessly doing the dishes, we are also hearing our thoughts. Instead of just mindlessly driving the car, feeling the anxiety but not paying attention, you listen to the thoughts. This is not mystical, people. It is logical, and we have to train ourselves to do it. And then slowly we get the skill to hear what anxiety is saying. This is really subtle. To hear, depression is fairly easy. You just have to write down what Miffy says. I'm a creep. I'm no good. Life is worthless. It's pretty evident it's thought. There are thoughts right there, But we're so addicted to the physical feeling, we don't pay attention to the conceptual thought that informs the physical feeling. That's the job of being a Buddhist. So, of course, it's chaotic. But at least if we can begin to not believe, this is what Lama Zopa says, if you can start not to believe 100% that just maybe I'm not as bad as I think, that just maybe Eddie isn't as bad as we think he is. This is the miracle of space, And then we just got to be brave to practice every day, knowing that your mind isn't set in stone. You can change your thoughts. You can learn to be in control of them. When you read, like in Lama's Mahamudra, some of the qualities you'd accomplish from having got single-pointed concentration, as he said, it's almost unbelievable. This is the brilliance that we've got the potential to accomplish. Every one of us, millions of people over the centuries, and today still, people are accomplishing this technique. It's a living, extant, real psychological skill. So all we can do is try one step at a time, a little bit every day, and then learn to pay attention every second, as much as we can, to what's going on. And then what do? You don't just let it be there. You sometimes, you either tell it to shut up if it's not too loud. One roommate's making a fuss, I'll give it a break. Shut up, Robina. Or if it's really loud and you're arguing, you've got to argue with it. So who argues with the negative thought in your mind? Your positive thoughts. Your good roommates argue with the bad roommates. It's just a way of saying it, You argue with them. You be your own friend. We do this every day. Let's say when you meet, you're going to have a fight with your sister. And you're sitting there talking to yourself after the phone call. You make some decisions, don't you? Okay, I think this, I think that, and I have to apologise to her. And you decide, and you pick up the phone, you apologise. That's what being a Buddhist means. You're being your own therapist, arguing with yourself. Your virtue won the day, and you forgave your sister. If your virtue never wins the day, it's because you refuse to forgive her because your delusions are running the show. And so it's a hard job to do this. We need a good sleep at night to relax and start the job the next day. But like any jobs you do, you keep getting better at it. We keep getting better at it. We have to be confident about that because we're not set in stone, Then we become more courageous. And then as you're really practicing, because you don't have to vomit out all your emotions all the time. Right now, we can't hold any of our emotions. As soon as someone says, let's say I haven't seen Miffy for 10 years and my boyfriend just left me. Hi, Robina, I haven't seen you for years, darling. How are you? And I will just vomit out my mouth and pour out all my feelings because someone asked me how I'm feeling because I don't know how to deal with my own mind. I'll pour out all my heart to pour on Miffy, and she's just surprised it's been for 10 years. What else is this, But you know what? If you're working on your mind, she will see me and she'll say, how are you, Robina? And I'll say, I'm really well, Miffy. How are you, darling? She would never know I'm having a problem. Not because I'm suppressing, but because I'm working on my mind. You become braver. You become more grown up, This is so important. So we've got to have courage. We've got to have confidence that we've got this incredible potential. And the map is there. And then occasionally when you read the stories, like you hear about the lamas, you see the people you think are your teachers, just by seeing them, it reminds you can do it. You've been working on the back courts for weeks and you get a bit depressed and you suddenly go to see Federer, you go, phew, I can do it. That gives you courage, Lama said that in Mahamudra. He loved reading about Milarepa. And Lama was really in the monastery since he's 6 years old. He was really intense. He was a great yogi. He was a great kind of, he's actually the reincarnation, but never formally recognised because of these, patriarchal Tibetans. He was a reincarnation of a previous abbess, of a nun, So the nuns took care of him when he was a little boy and sent him off to the monastery. Anyway, he said he loved reading about Milarepa because he was a serious debater and a meditator. It was amazing. He said it was so inspiring. He thought if Milarepa can do it, so can I. This is why it's necessary to get some confidence by seeing other people, by looking at His Holiness and not just going, oh, that's His Holiness. No, he's showing us how we can be. No, especially with Lama Zopa, because all these lamas, I think I might have mentioned this, they show the aspect of different ways of being. His Holiness always shows the aspect of being an ordinary person. He never shows any special qualities or power. He's really down to earth and easy and very funny, you know. I don't know if I mentioned it last week, but he's hilarious how he answers questions now. He's so funny with Westerners. He's so Western. Like one time one person was complaining about the way his sister treated him or something. And then he wanted to know what His Holiness said he should do. And His Holiness said, well, I'd tell her to go to hell. I mean, he's hilarious, you know. Or another person asked this long, complicated question, what's the answer to that, His Holiness? He says, I don't know. He's so wonderful and down to earth and ordinary, you know. Now, if we look at Lama Zopa, he kind of shows an aspect quite different. He's renowned for not sleeping. So already that freaks you out. What do you mean not sleeping? It's like mentally ill not to sleep. But he's got, as Roger said, Venerable Roger, his attendant, for Rinpoche, sleep is a disgusting waste of time. Because this is how the yogis are. I mean, His Holiness really doesn't sleep. If he is who he is, he pretends to sleep, okay? He's a great meditator. But he has to show the aspect of being ordinary. It's good for the world. Because people love to put him up on a pedestal. So he keeps trying to come down from his pedestal, which is good for us. But, you know, these great meditators, these yogis, these scholars and these bodhisattvas who have such unbelievable compassion, it's hard to imagine. But still, it gives you courage to see them, you know, to know it's possible. And there's a map there. That should give us courage. I mean, but this is one interesting point. Let's say you don't have a map and your destination is 1 mile away. You'll just feel lost the whole time. It's like a miracle if you find your destination because you don't have a map. But if you've got 10,000 kilometers away, if you have a map, you can relax. This is a very important point because you check, you tick the boxes as you go, and you've got a map. You just keep moving. Check the map, do the instructions, and you get to the next light, sound, next to the next lamp post. Oh, they said that'll be there, and you keep moving in this organic, logical, progressive way. Confident each step of the way, and you get more confident as you keep going, you know. This is really important to understand.
Venerable Robina, I remember His Holiness actually saying in that aspect of showing being ordinary, when someone asked about anger, and he said, oh, I do get angry sometimes, but it doesn't stick. You know, like I'm just kind of paraphrasing here, but I was really interested in how he said he had that response.
That's right.
But it comes and it goes.
But that's just because he's being kind. So, I mean, that's what's interesting about His Holiness. It's too much. The Tibetans understand that he's a Buddha manifesting as a human, and they understand that Buddhas are perfect, and they understand that there's no faults. So they get that, but we don't get that. That's too weird for us. So I remember one time, I don't know if I mentioned this story, it's wonderful. You know, they always talk about how, oh, I don't know anything, they say. These Tibetans always say, oh, I don't know anything. And that humility works for the Tibetans because they know that it's being humble. But it backfired one time, and this bloke in America, he burst into tears and said, well, if you don't know anything, what chance have we got? So he went sort of back a bit, and he sort of said, well, I do know a few things, you know. It was so sweet. And he really talks to us a very different way because we don't get that humility business. We want them to be confident. If you don't know anything, what chance have we got? It's such a good point. So I knew a few things, he said. And then that was in that talk, Lama Zopa mentioned it. He then told the people that his first time in India in 1956, he had a memory of being at the back of a crowd, he said, of Buddha's teachings at the time of the Buddha. Wasn't that wonderful? He said, but he's sort of humble little Indian in the back of the crowd. He had a memory of being at Buddha's teachings. I thought that was a delicious thing to hear. You get confidence from that, don't you? It was so sweet. Unbelievable. Anyway, we can do this too. We can do it too. So part of the process of this, our minds are chaotic. We do believe the ugliness is real. We don't have enough confidence in our virtue. This is how we are. But the first step in this, there's several first steps. The first step is, the first step is to control your body and speech, to control the servants of your mind. That's an whole other discussion. We'll get into that one. But the first step, in a sense, is to know your mind's chaotic, to know the crazies are all there, to know there are a bunch of habits, but to know they don't identify you. You don't define yourself by them. They are not at the core of your being. I find that pretty stupendous. Even when in the midst of the misery, you've got this little creepy thing, this little voice sneaking in saying, it's okay, Robina, this is not you in your core, that this is not set in stone. This is very important to remember repeatedly. Then you get more courageous instead of pushing all the ugly thoughts away, which is a side, because we can't bear the pain. then you learn to listen to the crazy roommates. Don't just put your put your earplugs on. Listen to what anger's saying. You listen to what anxiety is saying. You just don't just buy into the anxiety and feel gripped by it. You start to check, well, what is it saying? What am I? So you do analysis. You use logic. Everybody can do this. So if Niffy, when she's in the midst of a despair and depression, if she's brave enough, when we start to practice, we do this, she then thinks, well, is it true that I am really that bad? This is a powerful, you put it, just by that thought, you put an atomic bomb under your depression. You're giving it space to think, is it really that true that everything is so despairing? This is profound, not to be scared of what's there because it doesn't define you, and to begin to listen and argue with and lessen the power. And the point is, when you lessen the power of those thoughts, when you greet those roommates and you see them face to face and listen to what they're saying, then that already diminishes their power. That's the point. This is incredible. I have to taste this. Know it's true. And then also just having a daily practice. We're creatures of habit and form. It gives us courage if we have a disciplined practice, not to wait for anything magical to happen, but that you do something every morning, something every day. This gives you some confidence, So sweethearts, I think it's now time for you to ask me some questions. We've got 15 minutes before we have a break. Ask me any
So while I'm waiting for other people to put questions into the chat, I was wondering, Venerable, what's the difference between just suppressing our anger and, for instance, putting our anger housemate into quarantine, like a kid telling it to go to its room?
It's such a good question. It's such a hugely different one. It's hugely different. So some people have the characteristic of not having very volatile anger, being very afraid of their angry thoughts. So then those people will literally suppress, and and that's what they mean by, when bad things happen and, violent things happen, difficult things happen in your life, because you can't bear the pain of the anger, you suppress the anger, you even suppress the whole memory. That's what they mean by PTSD or something. You literally suppressed it. That's such a common, tragic way that we suffer. Some people, the pain of life is so unbearable that you can't look at it. You can't hear your own response to it, so you suffocate. But this has to come out somewhere. It can never just disappear, So that's a typical kind of approach of a person who is a nice person. I'm not being sarcastic, but who doesn't shout and yell and scream and punch and kick. A person like me, we all suppress everything. We don't know what's going on. We're not aware. But in my attitude was more, I would shout and yell immediately, So the difference between suppressing, which means you're afraid of what's inside you. That fear is a component there. But the other, so we've only got two modes. We've got vomit it all out or live in denial, don't we? This is extremes, I'd say. So this third option that the Buddhist approach is suggesting, and this is what happens often with our therapy. When we have a therapist whom we trust, we're brave enough to bring up the painful thoughts. So at least that person could be a sounding board for us to have the courage to hear those thoughts, because there's so much terror in our minds, so much fear of being bad girls, so much fear of being angry, so much fear of being criticized. We don't notice it. It's just terrifying. So to have a good therapist, even, that's what we do in our culture, to be a sounding board for you, who adores you and loves you, whom you can trust, and you can allow it to come up so you can at least see it. This is huge. We've got to see it, So suppressing your anger is just terrifying. But at least there's one good quality. You don't harm others. So if you are a depressed type person, and let me look, I think I've got to talk more about depression and understand how it's related to anger. But even in general, though, you can at least be happy if you're a good girl and you don't harm others. You harm yourself, but when a person like me who's angry, you harm yourself and others, So at least you're one step ahead. But the thing is, okay, so suppressing anger is just living in denial of it. But this other approach of the Buddhas is exactly what I'm talking about, becoming conscious of your thoughts, becoming conscious. There's no point, you see, in the modern psychology, we go back into the past because we're looking for needles in haystacks for the cause of why you're angry. The Buddha's view is much more direct, and please hear this, it's a very radical difference. Buddha's not saying you have to go into the past. It's helpful, but it's not the point. You go down into your own mind. You go beyond the emotion. That's why you've got to have concentration every day, and you start to allow the thoughts to come to the surface. And then you don't, because then you learn to know how to handle those thoughts. You become your own therapist. That's exactly what I'm saying before. You learn to listen to what's in your mind. Then, I'm not asking you to go back into what you felt when you were 2 years old. No, that'll come eventually. You deal with your mind this second. And when you deal with what's arising now, then you can argue with it, and then you've solved the problem. There is nothing to suppress. That's the practice. And if you deal with now, then as we get better and better and better at dealing with now and arguing with it and working it through and learning to live with the crazy roommate, if it's not going to go away immediately, and it won't, then you get more brave and more stable. But suppressing and then living in denial, this becomes a nightmare, you know. But it takes enormous courage. I can never stress that enough, because the instinct of ego is to deny or to blame. We've only got blame me or deny or blame others. This is different. This is like owning it, seeing it. But you can only own it if you know it's not intrinsic within you. If you think it's your real nature, of course you can't own it. It's unbearable. But as soon as you realize it's my anger, it's true, I have got anger. But ego wants to say, but I'm allowed to be angry, or it's his fault. We can't, ego can't own. It's too terrifying. So by seeing the anxiety, knowing it doesn't define me, and kind of navigating through it, having a little weep, going to bed, having a cup of tea, don't grow it, don't believe this is me and have a panic attack, allow it to be there. And if you've got a good friend, speak about it, and then navigate through it, you know. And then eventually that's what we can learn to do, to be our own therapist. And eventually we'll be able to handle whatever life brings. This is not a joke. This is literally true, but one step at a time. Did I answer the question, maybe?
Yep.
Good.
So there are a couple of questions here, Venerable Robina. So Anna's just kind of said that cognitive dissonance is where you delay processing traumatic memories.
Well, that's how we live our life, and that's how we spend our lives. We've given a fancy word to it in the West, but that's exactly how most of us live our lives. We cannot bear when the thing happens, when you're a little girl, let's say, that bad thing happens, we can't cope with what arises in our mind, so we suppress it or we blame someone else. So we're not dealing with it in reality. That's how we live our lives, honey. This is nothing unusual. This is how we live our lives, living in denial. And there's this terrible disconnect between what's going on in here and how I think I'm appearing to other people. There's many other things involved here, but let's talk about them. But this is exactly right, Anna. It's exactly right, darling. This is normal daily life. I mean, I always use the example in my life. I mean, I might have mentioned in the past, I know I've told Miffy, but one time I got held up with a gun. And it's just a simple example of, because I dealt with it right then. I dealt with it, so then there was nothing residual. There was no fear, there was no trauma, there was no drama, there was nothing was left over, because it happened to be, I dealt with it. It's a simple example, especially if something quite dramatic is being held up with a gun. I want to tell briefly, I was in New York. I was in New York with my sister, and it was so funny. It was in the 70s, and I'd just been this radical lefty for several years, and Janet and I used to go shoplifting or up and down Oxford Street at Christmas time. I know it sounds shocking, but hear my point, with these noble radical lefties who are stealing from the rich, to give to the poor. That's pathetic, right? But that's how we were. So we'd go down the Oxford Street at Christmas time and steal, very low-level stealing, like £300, which is a lot in 1970s. Anyway, we used to steal. So I'd given it up, but Janet was still stealing a bit. This is a part of the story. So we'd been to this Irish bar downtown in New York in 1974, and apparently we didn't know. We're so naive. This is the worst time for violence. And New Yorkers, I can't describe to you their fears. They've got about 7 locks on their doors. They call them police locks. I'd never seen anything like the paranoia and fear among people as New Yorkers. It was fascinating to me. Anyway, we were walking back home at 2 a.m. from this Irish pub, and Janet had her glass of wine still. She just didn't, she stole it, automatically. We're walking down the street, 2 a.m, lower East Side, the worst, most dangerous part of New York. We had no idea, we're so naive. And this dude comes out of nowhere and he's got a gun and suddenly it's in my chest. It's here. I'll never forget this thought, cold grey metal, like you read in books, you know. I'd never seen a gun in my whole life. And there was this cold grey metal right there between my two breasts. And this dude was about here. So what happens with me, because I'm kind of volatile and I'm kind of whatever, when people kind of dare to threaten me, I get very arrogant and start arguing with them. So within 1 millisecond, it was so crystal clear, this whole experience was so clear. Suddenly within a second, I realised he was more afraid than me. And then suddenly I started to treat him like I was like his mum. And I swore at him, I'm not going to swear now, but I said, and I get very logical. Who the do you think you are? How dare you ask us for money? I said, you give us your money, we're just as poor as you. He was so shocked by this, he couldn't believe it, you know. He kept saying, give me your money, bitch, you know, right? And then Janet kept saying, hey, brother, have some wine. I don't want your money, I don't want your wine. It was just hilarious, it was ridiculous. But the point I'm getting at, this is what I learned from this experience. I wasn't plan to do this, it's my nature. Because there was no fear, because I turned my fear into aggression, which is my advantage of being an angry person, this dude, it was like in the end I even liked him. It was this sweet fellow. It must have been really hard work for him to go and stick somebody up and steal their money, you know. I knew he was more scared than me. And in the end, he kind of kept going back and forth. And the added piece is also hilarious. Americans, as soon as they hear what sounds like an English accent, they think you're the Queen of England. You can't believe. So he showed these ridiculous girls speaking like the Queen of England, not paying any attention to his gun. He could not get over this. It was so absurd, you know. So what I'm getting at is this. I learned that, and it was well before I was a Buddhist. There was no trauma. I was not victimized. I didn't have a fainting. I didn't have to go to a counsellor. I didn't have fear forevermore walking out on the street. For whatever reason, I dealt with a trauma. I dealt with it. I was the one probably who felt better. He probably felt really unhappy because his power was taken away. So I learned from that. It's not that easy. I mean, I didn't plan to be this way, but that was the learning that when you deal with something when it arises, if what is what we're capable of eventually, then there's nothing left over. There is no residual. There is no trauma left. This is what Buddha is saying. And forget about even realizing emptiness. Even this, and I'm talking about small things. Forget about being held up with a gun. Just having your neighbour be mean to you. Just have your hubby not do what you want. They're the examples. 1,000 times a day we're going to have a little drama and then we don't deal with it properly mentally. And this is the other one. I have to talk about this and maybe next week we can do it. I've got time. Have a break. Okay, we'll talk after the break. The deepest attachment we've got, and we'll talk about it. This is the most primordial. So I think we have to talk about attachment more precisely, okay? So we'll do this and we'll have a break now.
Oh, Venerable Robina, just before we finish, your story also reminds me, one of our students, her dad was held up with a home invasion. And so this young fellow came with a knife.
Yes.
And her elderly dad, when he was kind of, held in a headlock, was saying to this guy, it's okay, I won't hurt you.
Really? That's
the dad
amazing.
said that.
That's amazing. So what did the dude do? Did the dude calm down?
The dude just was like, dropped the knife and just left. He was completely fine.
So there's two different methods, same result. It's very fascinating, isn't it?
But it's the same insight he realised that this home invader was far more terrified.
There you go, that's right, exactly. And that was so instinctive. I mean, I was surprised by my response. I mean, okay, when I was a little girl, things would happen because men, men do weird things since we're born. We know that. So I'd always be able to deal with them. So but that was such a powerful example. And that's the one. And so, and that means he didn't have any trauma. The grandpa would have been just fine. Probably the guy had more trauma. That's the point, But it's easy to talk these stories, but it's good to have extreme examples. So deal with your baby events when the smallest thing happens that you don't want. Before you don't wait till you get held up with a gun, okay? That's the point. Then you are able to handle what life brings. The key to it, and we'll talk about this more, is seeing what's arising in your mind and knowing, having the courage and the ability to work with what's there. That's the skill the Buddhist view of the mind gives us. And this is not meant to be mystical. I promise you. It's hard work, but it's possible.